Hello and welcome to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy,
And I'm Claire.
and we're here to talk about some of the disturbing things that go on in the world, past and present. We feel like not knowing doesn't mean the crazy doesn't exist.
So we're going to scar you with the knowing.
Enjoy.
So today we're going to stick to the back in time thing since you started it last week. So we're just going to mingle on in there because there's some interesting cases.
Nuh-uh. I didn't done start it. You started it with your hoes.
Oh, yeah. But
Hey.
we're going to continue on from last week and discuss Lydia Adler.
What'd she done do?
So this one takes place in London, England, the year 1744.
Yeehaw. Going back in time.
Not to be the asshole first thing in the day, but all of these are going to be back in time, Andrea.
Well, this one's way back in time.
Way back. But Lydia Adler, she was born in 1704, so she's roughly 40 years old when all this happens. She's an English housewife who is accused of murdering her husband in 1744 by throwing him to the ground, kicking and stamping on his groin, and giving him a mortal bruise, of which he languished in St. Bartholomew's Hospital from the 11th to the 23rd of May, and then he died.
Wait, so he died from having his balls stepped on?
Yes, so I just want to throw it out there so you get what we're talking about, and then we're going to go through it because it's interesting. So John is Lydia's husband, and they quarreled all the time. Lydia is described as a large, bad-tempered woman, and John as a meek, henpecked husband. Which I thought that was just a funny description anyway. Henpecked. I don't know really what that means, but he sounds, obviously, he sounds like a little skinny man to me. But Lydia also argued with the other wives, of which there are 4 total, and John would intervene.
He's got 4 wives?
Yes, so not to paint her as a victim or him, I just want to explain both sides of this because neither one of them sound like great people. But Lydia knew 2 of the 3. I mean, obviously she's the 4th, but it's one of those, he's not innocent in this one.
I'm still stuck on the 4 wives thing. Like, he's divorced them?
No.
Like, they're sister wives type situation?
No, they live at all, like, other places. Like, he's got setups everywhere.
And they all know about each other?
No, like, I don't know what the other wives know. Lydia knows of 2 of them. So I was just like, what? So on May 11th, 1744, she's seen throwing him to the ground and repeatedly kicking him in the groin. Several hours later, he goes to a friend's home with a bloody handkerchief to his head, shouting, "This eternal fiend will be the death of me," to which I loosely translate, "That some bitch done killed me." Because
that's the Alabama translation.
Again, a loose translation, but that's the way I read it. So he was taken to St. Bartholomew's Hospital, where he called for Lydia to be arrested. Now, Lydia comes to visit him and laughs at him.
Sorry.
I don't know if it's just maybe she's not taking it seriously. Like, if she did legitimately kick him in the balls, that I wouldn't think, not that I've done that, but I wouldn't think you'd have killed somebody doing that. But he's laying in the hospital, obviously, when she goes to visit him. So I don't know if she's hawking this up to he's just being a whiny baby. But so Adler.
Hey, so we didn't do our trigger warnings before this one. I feel like the trigger warning in this one goes out as a shout out to all the men folk that listen to us for ball smash it.
I feel like I did what I told them what we were going to talk about.
Yeah, but it's just funny because how many guys do you think are sitting there listening to this guy died from having his balls crushed under his wife's foot?
Well, I feel like before we got detailed, that was the warning.
But you know what I mean? That, like, you know how they do like the
yeah. But that's where
And
I feel like when she went to visit him and chuckled, it was like a, "Get over it, ya baby," is why she laughed. Not saying it doesn't hurt, obviously, I don't have balls to know the experience, I'm sure it does. It seems like a very tender area that should only be treated nicely.
unless you have 4 wives, in which case, buddy, you get what you get. Carry on.
Yeah. So John tells the nurse, quote, "I'm a dead man and this woman has killed me." He again lingered there until the 23rd before expiring, only minutes before his death, calling, "Do you have the warrant yet?" Because the whole time he's in the hospital, he's just asking people is she gonna be arrested. So that's what whenever I say he's asking if the warrant's been received yet, that he's waiting for her to be arrested for his murder.
Wow.
Which is like, "Oh, okay, serious argument here." So the friend, that whose house that he went to when he had the bloody handkerchief to his head, which I don't know what got him in the head, but, his friend was Benjamin Barton, who later testifies at Lydia's, uh, trial, but, he would testify to visiting him. He also denied him lodging when he came to his house with a bloody handkerchief because he wanted to stay anywhere else other than with that woman. Because of Lydia's turbulent disposition, he would tell him, "No, you can't stay here," because he didn't want that drama at his house,
Can't blame him. But why didn't he go to one of his other wives' houses?
and explain that he had been beaten by his other wife.
Well, he could, I'm sure he's
Yeah,
a
he could have made
master
it
liar.
up.
He could have been like, "I got kicked by a horse," or something.
Well, he ends up going to the hospital anyhow, so it's
Yeah.
probably best that he didn't stay at his house anyways. But Ben would visit John every other day while he's at the hospital. Now, 2 hours prior to his death is when he'd ask Benjamin if he would get him justice for his death, and obviously Benjamin would promise that to his friend on his deathbed that he will get justice for him. Now, as soon as he dies, Lydia is arrested, and at her trial in June, her daughter will give evidence against her that her mother willfully assaulted her father. Now,
Oh,
Hannah Adler is her name, would be questioned, and she said that her father died between 12 and 1 o'clock, and about 2 hours before he would tell her, "I'm a dead man, and this lady," referring to the mother, "has killed me." That after he repeatedly declared his wife was the person that murdered him and begged that she bring justice for his death, he last declares all of this 10 minutes before his death. So it's just like every person who will listen, the nurse, his friend, now the daughter, he'll make that plea that he wants something to happen to her in response. Now Mr. Goodwin, or Dr. Goodwin I should say, a surgeon, also testifies that the husband died from that blow, but acknowledged that the deceased had a rupture and that such a blow he had received would not have hurt a person in sound health, which to me is one of those, okay, so he had something already ongoing or underlying that any other man getting kicked in the balls wouldn't have died from that.
do you hear that, man? If you get hit in the nads, you're not actually dying unless you have an underlying condition. So I don't want any of you to think that you have to run out and go have your nads checked because you accidentally get kicked in the nads. All right,
So
sorry.
this led me to researching groin hernias, which it's not even today where it is serious. It's not likely to cause your death, but it can still cause complications if it's not repaired initially. Now, one of those complications is strangulation of tissue. So basically, a hernia is when stuff behind that muscle pushes through a break in the muscle and then gets trapped on the other side. That results in blood supply being cut off and the tissue beginning to die. Now, when that happens, that's a medical emergency even by today's standards. So you're talking 1744. If that is what happened, he would have needed emergency surgery if that happened today, let alone in 1744.
Where they did nothing.
Well, I mean, even if you did surgery, then that would have been, it's not good. So basically, having that as an issue is what killed him. But So if that happened, the strangulated tissue most likely over those period of days released toxins and infection into his bloodstream, which probably resulted in his death from sepsis. Now, symptoms of strangulated or a strangulated hernia would obviously be acute pain becoming severe, darkening or reddening the skin over the hernia, inflammation, inability to pass a bowel movement, or even gas. So now, where the details don't get that much for why he's in the hospital, I can only imagine also if he doesn't poop over those several days, that's also an issue too. Now, during the trial, Lydia will claim she was arguing with the other wife and John intervened. Now, Lydia will say the other woman fell on him when he tried to break him up, and that she never lifted a hand or a foot against him. Now, Joseph Steele would claim John was kind to all 4 of his wives at first, but would severely beat all of them. He also testified at being witness to some of Lydia and John's arguments. Now, I've got some of the rest of this is like just from the trial. I find it interesting reading like the trial notes of things back in the day because there weren't really like cross examinations. People could talk to each other in the court. So like there'll be a portion where the doctor is testifying, but Lydia is talking to him directly.
Okay.
So it's just like where people are just asking questions to just try to figure out what happened, obviously. Now, when Joseph Steele testifies, he says, I have known the prisoner, meaning Lydia, about 9 or 10 years. Mr. Adler was acquainted with another woman in Golden Lane, which is a street, that he had 2 children by. Now, Lydia and that lady would fight like cats and dogs. He also had a housekeeper who was pretty lusty, and she used to beat him. And when he went... that's why I thought it was funny him being described as a meek, henpecked husband, because he's just going around screwing the town. So, and then the fact that he had a housekeeper that was described as lusty, I was like, man, this guy cannot keep it in his pants. So the irony that he has a groin hernia that kills him is just hilarious to me. It probably shouldn't be.
It's called karma.
It really is.
Like, keep it in your pants. And if he was hitting his wives too, like,
yeah,
so you're beating them, cheating on them, and then your balls are what kills you. I don't feel sorry for him.
Yeah.
Like me, if you'd like, I don't care. It's karma. I'm not karma.
It gets even like, I don't want to say comical, but again, that so he has the lusty housewife that he's given it to, and he Steele describes her as pretty, a modest behaved creature as she could be, and that continued for so long. But then when when money became thin, he wanted her to work and allowed her little for it. So he would buy stale items for 2 pence, but if they were not stale, it would have been 8. So he's buying some shitty things with whatever money he can because he's trying to support all these women, and really he can't. So he's not doing a very good job with what he is doing.
Does he have a bunch of kids? I know you mentioned the one daughter, but I feel like with 4 women, he's got to have like...
I would think, but other than the 2 that they say that he has with a woman who lives on Golden Lane, I didn't get a long list of how many he fathered.
Gotcha.
Now, Joseph Steele will say that he believes that stories were trumped up against Lydia, and kind of like everybody in the town, kind of. It sounds to me like she was an opinionated woman that people generally didn't like. And you got to keep in mind, time period wise, they were seen as subordinate, and she should have been quieter. Obviously, wouldn't have been getting away with smacking her husband. But Joseph Steele would say he believed that there were trumped up stories about her. And then he's asked, you seem to say that this woman did really beat him? And Steele would reply, I believe she was like all the other women in his life, that when he struck her, she struck him again. So it sounds like a very tumultuous relationship. So obviously they're both hitting each other, and that seems to be how John had all of his relationships, is that somebody'd hit him back. I know,
It's
like,
not
it's not
funny.
funny.
Domestic abuse is not funny, but that is kind of funny.
Well, it's one of those, I wouldn't have thought in 1744 that they would hit back,
No.
but that this man is getting hit back by several other women was just like, "What?" And so Joseph is asked, "Did you ever see her strike him?" And Joseph again will say, "Yes, I have. Upon my oath, I have. I have seen them fight up and down." Now, this is going to be something that I thought was interesting as well, is that the previous September, Lydia was indicted for breaking and entering into the dwelling of the younger John Adler, which is John's son, and stealing some apparel and the property of Priscilla Adler, his wife, a silver watch that belonged to John, and then the deceased, she stole John's watch, which was his dad's, but she stole it from the son. I don't
Okay.
like when people are named the same. It gets confusing.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little confused.
But that happened the previous September. So it's just like she broke into the son's house, stole the dad's watch and things
That's not
from.
her kid.
Well, but it's the dad's watch. So even if it's her husband's watch, I don't know what would have caused her to break into somebody else's home to steal things that were. I don't know what kind of family situation it was. So
But that's not her son. That's like his son with somebody else.
I would assume it was, but it just says John Adler's son. But again, that he seems to have. I don't know who's his mother. Even if it was his mom, she broke into somebody else's house. If mom broke into your house and stole dad's watch, I mean, it's not her home to break into, and even if there are things in there that she thinks are hers, that's not the way to go about it.
Yeah.
But that happened the September before. So I think with bad blood being around and then the dad dying, obviously she's got a list of people who are kind of out for blood. So I kind of feel like it's near the Salem witch trials of, I don't know who you want to believe, or if people embellished things or just decided to say they saw things that they didn't. Now, then this would bring forth Hannah Adler. She testifies. Now, she's John Adler's daughter-in-law. So she's married to one of the sons. Again, don't know which son and who's the mother. But she said on the 13th of May that John, came to see them at their home, and they lived close to Bartholomew. He told them that the wicked woman, which is the prisoner, was the woman that murdered him. Which, again, I think, what a dramatic man. He's not dead yet. He can't go around and saying he's murdered. But
He can. His balls hurt.
Well, I'm not debating that it probably did hurt. But so she's asked, when did he tell you this? And she says, well, he said it happened on the 11th of May, and he said that to her on the 13th. And then she's asked, upon what occasion did he tell you this? He said she had thrown him across the bed and the bedside and kneeled upon him. He was forced to go away from her. Then she's asked, was he naked then? She replies, yes, he was just going into his bed. How long after that did he die? She replies, he died 12 days afterwards. She's asked, had he been out after this? Yes, he had a beer. So after it happened, he still found it in him to go to the bar. So I just like,
Why is his daughter-in-law seen him naked?
So that's the story that he told her. So she didn't see that one. When he came over on the 13th is when she heard about the story, but he told her that he was thrown across the bed and she kneeled upon him and he was forced to go away. But then afterwards again, he went and had a beer. So this is what leads me to believe that even obviously it hurt, but he didn't start to deteriorate really until about 48 hours, which again, I would think strangulated hernia as well. So, because as it's starting to go, the more swelling things are starting to turn. Now,
Okay.
then Benjamin Barton testifies that he came to his house on the day that it happened with that handkerchief on his head and asks if he could spare a bed in his house. To which Benjamin says no, which we already knew, because Lydia is a very turbulent woman. Now, and that's again when he shouts, "The eternal fiend will be the death of me, for she has stomped upon my private parts." Benjamin says he never saw him anymore until the following Tuesday. Now, this occurred on a Friday at his home, and then that's when he went to that. The following Monday, he sends a note from Dr. Goodman because he wants Benjamin to pay for the doctor to come see him because obviously his junk's hurting.
Yeah.
But that needs to be coughed up before he'll be seen. And then he's asked when that happened, and that was the 23rd. And then he's asked, what did he desire? Barton says, he said if I had not got a warrant by that date, he desired I would see her brought to justice, and I said I would if it laid in my power. Then I went home, and about 2 hours his daughter came and told me her father was dead. I was with him much around 12 o'clock, and he was dead before 2. So this goes back to Dr. Goodman. Now, he says he attended John on the 14th of May, and the first thing John says when he walks in is, "This wicked woman has murdered me." Now, Dr. Goodman wanted to search him over regarding his complaint, and John will tell him that she hurt him in his private parts. So when he's examined, Dr. Goodman finds that he has a ruptured gut in his scrotum. The gut had fallen down into his scrotum, or the hernia that I was telling you about earlier. Now, he found that upon examination was not, which notwithstanding all applied to relieve him, he died. So basically, he tried everything that he could, but he still died. And Dr. Goodman said he believed that about the 23rd of May, when he opened him up, that the gut had been mortified and had been the cause of his death. Now, he's asked by which occasion was that mortified, and Dr. Goodman will say, I take it to be by the bruise upon part of the gut which comes down into the scrotum. It had ruptured and had been of a long continuance, to which I take it's been there for a while, obviously, and that's again, if he wouldn't have had that, he wouldn't have died from this.
Yeah.
So then he's asked, suppose this had happened to a found man, what damage do you think would have happened to him? Dr. Goodman replied, it would not have hurt him, for some labor 20 years under the complaint. Which, again, means some men will continue about lives without any complications. And that's even true today. I mean, you're not guaranteed there won't be complications, but obviously, if that muscle gets weaker, the likelihood of complications increase.
Right. Makes sense.
Now, Dr. Goodman will say it was sufficient to occasion a stagnation of the contents, which occasioned the complaint. His general cry was the wicked woman had killed him, but who he meant I can't tell, for he never mentioned her by name. Now, this is when Lydia asked, Dr. Goodman may be a very good surgeon. He is surgeon of St. Luke's Parish, but I never knew a surgeon to open a man without 3 or 4 surgeons with him, for he had this ailment a great many years. If he lays anything against me, I will suffer the law. My husband has 2 months and was not able to put his shoes or socks on. Which, to me, again, it could have been just one of those, if he did fall down, and he might want to be a bitter man to say that, his wife, that obviously they weren't getting along, did it, but if he couldn't put his shoes or stockings on 2 months prior, it could have been one of those, it was slowly getting worse, and he fell, and it just happened to really do a number.
Yeah.
And then he
And
assumed because it was during a scuffle, it would have been, even if no one touched him, it would have been discolored like a bruise.
because of the strangulation. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just like, so basically, since there's like different variations, it stinks for her because if she really didn't do anything to him, you know.
Well, we know she did something. We just don't know if it was the cause.
Now, Lydia will go on and say, my husband loved women. He had got 2 wives besides me. He had a crew he lived with in St. Giles, and one of them gave me a slap to the face. I asked her what she was doing here, and she said he was her husband and struck me, and said she would cut me into 3 pieces and tore my cap off my head. John went to pull this creature off me and fell against something, and this creature fell upon him, and he fell backwards. She is a very great weight, and he got such a disorder by this that he could not put his own shoes or stockings on. He has not had an hour's health since I have had him, which is 4 years and a half. He was very bad to be sure, but I never lifted up a hand or foot against him. I was advised to carry him to the hospital, but that creature, pointing to Hannah Adler, knocked me down with her hair broom and took him to her house.
With her hair broom?
I know. I loved reading this stuff because it was so funny and the drama in it. So I don't think Lydia had many friends about her. So even if she was innocent of everything, she had nobody on her side. Now, originally, she was charged with murder, but in light of the doctor's testimony that it was downgraded to manslaughter, Lydia was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to be burned on the hand and then set free. Now,
Wait,
when
what?
it was a weird sentencing. Now, if she would have been found guilty of murder, she would have been burned at the stake. So, mind you, she's lucky for that sentence. But impatient, Lydia chided the warders, heating the branding iron and telling them to hurry up. She had linen to do. So I was just like, it's no wonder she had no one really on her side other than, I guess, the one guy that was just like, he beat his wives. So, but I was just like, how do you go and tell somebody, would you hurry up and heat that thing? I've got shit to do. Like, you want me to do it because you clearly are taking your time. But I could see where it was hard to befriend people if you're that kind of person. So her official reading of being found guilty is Lydia Adler, late wife of John Adler, was indicted for that she not have the fear of God before her eyes on the 11th day of May in the 17th year of His Majesty's reign, with force and arms in the parish of St. Spectacles, in the ward of Farringdon, within, in and upon John Adler, her husband, in the peace of God, feloniously, traiterously, wilfully, and of her malice aforethought, did make an assault, and him, the said John, upon the ground, feloniously, traiterously, wilfully, and of her malice aforethought, did cast and throw. And he, the said John, then and there lying, in and upon the groin of him, he, said John Adler, her husband, feloniously, treacherously, willfully, and of her malice aforethought, did kick and stomp, giving to the said John Adler upon the groin of him, the said John, one mortal bruise, of which said mortal bruise, the said John Adler, from the said 11th day of May to the 23rd of the same month, did languish, on which said 23rd day of May, in the parish of St. Bartholomew the Great. The said John Adler of the said mortal bruise did die, and therefore the jurors say that she, the said Lydia Adler, him the said John Adler, in manner and form aforesaid, feloniously, treacherously, willfully, and of her malice aforethought, did kill and murder. Which I personally think that is the longest winded way of saying she stomped his balls, he died of that bruise, she's guilty.
Can I just tell you that when you read that, I 100,000% think of like the Wizard of Oz, and you've got like the little munchkins, the 3 guys when they're standing there and they're like naming it off and as like the list of things. Like when she's dead.
I
Like the witch.
pictured a scroll and the man reading, and I can tell
Yes.
you, this is like 2 sentences, but I laughed every time I read the feloniously, treacherously, wilfully, and of her malice aforethought. How many times can you say that? That's a mouthful. Which is
I
why
don't
the way I
Do
sum
you
it
know what I'm
up.
talking about with the Wizard of Oz though? When they get the scroll out, the Lollipop League or whatever, and then the coroner comes out and he's like says that the
We
Wicked Witch,
represent.
the Lollipop League.
That's the Lollipop Guild. As coroner, I must observe. I don't remember the rest of the words, but yes.
That's what I pictured. She's really most sincerely good. Anyway, wow. Well, men, especially to our men folk out there, if you have owie boo boos and then you get stomped on your nads, you might want to get it checked out.
Well, don't wait till there's a stomping because that's a medical emergency, but just take those hernias seriously.
Fun stuff, Claire. Good job.
Well, that's where I was saying neither one of them seemed like they were the best people. Like, he's got 4 wives living all over the place, and she's getting slapped by other ladies who are saying that that's their husband. So I'm not sure if they did argue and he was naked and she kneed him in the balls, that I'm not saying it wasn't like maybe she walked in and there was another lady in the bed, or it was the housekeeper, since he was doing the housekeeper too. Again,
Yeah,
not to say he deserved any of it, but
I do. I say he deserved it.
I don't know about languishing for 12 days till you basically rotted to death.
Okay, so I get it. Healthcare at that time was very sketchy and they were kind of learning about what causes what to do what and all that fun stuff. But
Well,
he's
that's
going
one.
around boinking other people, slapping people around. I feel like if you're going to be a cheating, domestic abuse type individual, male or female, you kind of get what you get. And the fact that he went out with ball smashage as his cause of death
It's just
is
a
funny
cruel
as hell.
irony. Yeah, it's just a cruel irony. Now, that is one reason why I wanted to talk about groin hernias today, because even today, if that shit ruptured or there was strangulation of tissue, that's still a serious thing. Now, with the antibiotics, with the medical care that we have, it's still considered an emergency issue. So I can only imagine in 1744, which is why I was saying in today's standard, that's still a huge problem.
Yeah.
Just sucks to have to lay there, and I'm sure his balls hurt. But I did kind of laugh. But I did feel like that's why when she visited him in the hospital and laughed at him, I think she thought he was just being a baby. Otherwise, I don't think you'd go visit somebody in the hospital and laugh in their face if you thought in 12 days they'd be dead.
Yeah.
But that's all I've got. So,
but at the same time, I feel like if you're telling your significant other, you might want to get your junk checked out because it's been 2 months and you're not able to get around and kind of seem like you're in pain and they choose not to listen.
Yeah.
Not saying he deserved it on that aspect.
No, I feel like since he
funny.
couldn't put his socks or shoes on for the previous 2 months.
Yes. Kind of a red flag.
Yeah. But I feel like he probably did the whole, if he'd had it for obviously his whole life, but if he had like on and off pain, because again, that it could have been a while of stuff poked through that hernia and then just kind of found its way back. Because again, that's what a hernia, you can poke it back in. I don't know if you've ever felt an umbilical hernia, how you can feel you're pushing tissue back into that hole. So if it started small and just kept getting weaker, and mind you, Lydia is 40. I don't know how old John was. So if he's lived his whole life with that, it was just progressively getting worse then as the tissue or as the muscle became weaker. So it could have been as things would be pinched, but then kind of find their way back up inside, that maybe he was used to random pain. So when it was those 2 months that he was just like, he couldn't figure out why it wasn't getting better.
That makes sense.
But that's where also, if he did fall and have that lady land on him, that it could have just that force of having somebody bigger than you land on you, maybe that just shoved way more. I
Well,
kind
and
of picture like stepping on a water balloon. I don't know why. That's what I like.
I don't even have balls, and that made me kind of squirm.
But I feel like all the pain he was in, and he's mad at her. That's why it was thrown on Lydia. And mind you, she does not sound like a nice lady. She's even hassling the guy heating up her branding iron to hurry it up. She's got things to do.
I
So
picture them doing it, and she's like, "Can you hurry up?"
probably so. It's probably why it got kneed in the balls. Because at first, when I started reading this, I was like, maybe that bruising and swelling, and he died of an STD. Like,
I mean, it's possible.
well, they cut
He
him
was getting
open.
it everywhere.
So when they were interviewing or interrogating, whatever, during the trial, when Dr. Goodman was testifying, when he cut him open afterwards, he said it had already soured and mortified. So basically, the tissue that came through that hernia had already gone septic. It was dead tissue. That's what caused his death. So it leached into his blood and he died. But it's just how shitty 12 days of that.
So her only punishment was that they burned her hand.
Well, because of everybody else's testimony of, like, obviously he had a condition before, and when they asked him if that would have happened to somebody who did not have that hernia, he wouldn't have had that same reaction. So that's where it was. She didn't set out to kill him. She got a manslaughter charge rather than murder.
Yeah, but for a manslaughter charge, all she got was her hand burned.
I imagine it probably hurt.
Well, yes, I'm not taking away from that. I'm just saying I feel like back in those days, which by the way, we're saying I feel like a whole lot again, just saying. But back in those days, they were quick to like chop off people's heads and kill
Yeah.
people for acting out. So for her to have gotten granted, I know it probably hurt, but such a lenient sentence for
So
a murder charge.
they factored that in to also him beating her and the other wives, and the fact that other people had seen it is why it was manslaughter, because she didn't really set out to kill him. Or she could have plenty other ways. She was smacking him around enough, but he wasn't exactly innocent on the hitting. So,
Yeah.
and then the fact that afterwards he went out for a beer. So, being burnt in the hand was a punishment for those who successfully pled benefit of the clergy. Now,
What the hell's that mean? I don't
who's
want to
gonna
benefit
tell
from the
you?
clergy. Does that involve penises?
For you, of course it does. Now,
I need to
the
go to church more. Just kidding. I'm kidding.
Awkward. Now, what the benefit of the clergy meant, it was a colonial legal term rooted in medieval English law that allowed a person convicted of a capital crime to receive a special pardon and basically escape the death penalty. Now,
Special pardon.
this was first seen in the late 12th century in English law, and obviously it trickled over into like the American colonies for a bit, because that's where they came from. So it really started with Henry II. He was compelled by the church to grant every clerk or member of the clergy immunity from trial or punishment in secular courts. So basically what would happen is when an accused clerk produced a letter of ordination, the clerk would be turned over to the bishop for trials in the bishop's court, which, by the way, never inflicted the death penalty and frequently moved to an acquittal. So basically, if you were a part of the church, you were handled by the church. Now, given that started in the 12th century, so after several centuries, even it got to the point where even the remotest relationship to the church, people would claim the benefit of what they would call the benefit of the clergy. But by the 14th century, instead of producing letters of ordination or anything, the test to determine if somebody could claim clerical immunity, they would be required to show that they could read, and typically it would be a passage from the Bible. Or Psalms, rather. So later it was added on that the claim to benefit of the clergy could only be used once. Now, the benefit of the clergy was abolished in the 19th century, soon after the American Revolution. So that's just a tidbit, not necessarily anything that applies to this case at the time. So again, by the 14th century, the test was to be if you could read from Psalms, right? So typically, many criminals could do that. Or I didn't say many because let's face it, there weren't a lot of people who knew how to read anyhow. But the ones who could, even if they weren't part of the church, they were still able to be successful with that, claiming the benefit of the clergy. But
so pretty much, if you wanted to be a criminal back in the day, if you just memorized a passage,
yeah,
it was
you
your
could
free
fake,
and clear.
You could fake the phone and get out. But again, you could only do that the one time. So to avoid people from doing it multiple times, that's when they came up with the whole burnt in the hand, meaning they were branded on the thumb. Now, not like palm side up either, the back side. So like between your thumb and your index. Only punishment, but some people were still imprisoned or anything for a certain period of time. They were transported to, say, the United States, which weren't the United States then, but they were just either moved around, but that was a brand that stayed that whole time.
Just a question. I'm raising my hand.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so back in that time, if they were obviously men that were part of the clergy or women were nuns, then she obviously wasn't a nun because she was married and squished her husband's nads. So how can she claim it that she was part of the clergy? Is she just claiming sanctuary? Is that the same idea?
I don't feel like it was the same as sanctuary, because sanctuary had the whole 40-day limit of claiming sanctuary. But I feel like it's just one of those, if you can claim any relationship to the church, again, even the remotest relationship, they were able to claim benefit of the clergy. Because I feel like people were so fearful of God that they didn't want to touch any of that. If you could claim that you were connected in any way to the church, they're like, not it. I'm not getting in trouble for doing anything to you if I'm going to have to answer to God kind of scenario. So that's where I think that so many people were able to do that if they knew about it.
Huh.
It was usually like the same guy that would be the executioner, same dude that would be heating up the red hot poker. And
wait, I have another question. So if they got a free pass, with that free pass, they got branded, right?
That's what I'm getting at.
So because they didn't have really any convenient mode of news traveling. You could just move away and go be a criminal elsewhere, kind of like with your Carl Panzram case, where he was well traveled.
Yeah, but this would be the whole being burnt in a hand was a way for people to know wherever you went what you did. So that leads me to, so it was either like a court official, the public executioner that would heat the red hot poker kind of thing, but they would have letters. So for a thief, they'd get a T. For a felon, they just get an F. For an M, that's your murderer. Interestingly enough, Lancaster Castle still has branding irons and the loops and all that to hold down the person's arm. They still have those. That was a way so that they could do the whole leave and pretend. So that way they can't do the claim the benefit of the clergy ever again. They already got one pass. Next time you're not getting it again.
Right.
So interesting fact. So the people who had money and would try to do the benefit of the clergy, if they did successfully pull that one, some people would bribe the executioner and even the judge to apply a cold iron. So obviously you're not getting branded if it's not a hot iron, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that would usually happen if, for whatever reason, they were sympathetic to the defendant. But
I wonder what crimes.
I don't know. I feel like
or if it was somebody that you knew, maybe.
Well, no,
But then I feel like he wouldn't even end up in front of the judge.
So I feel like Lydia Adler is a good example of this because it's one of those. Fortunately, she has a doctor, and the fact that he has a prior condition scenario
Mm-hmm.
that it makes it like technically she could have been the cause to his death, but wouldn't it have killed him anyway? If he as it deteriorated, he was just really a strangulated hernia away from death anyway. She just sped things up. So it's just I could see that maybe hers was a cold iron.
Maybe.
Because I can tell you she's lost track of after this, which I don't blame her because people didn't like her before. They probably really don't want anything to do with her afterwards. But they lose track of her so much that there's no even record of how she died or when. So she up and poofed.
She moved is what it is.
Yeah. She got the heck out of Dodge.
She said, what is the expression? You have treated me like the wild beast of the forest.
Feloniously. Traiterously. So that's where I feel like it was a light sentence because, you know. But again, if she would have gotten found, she barely got away scot-free, really. Because if it had gone the other way, she would have been burned at the stake.
That's harsh.
That would have sucked. Which is why I can't believe she hassled the guy with the branding. Could you hurry it up?
I feel like she was...
I got plans.
I think that she probably was stressing. And it's one of those, can you just hurry up and get it over with already?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I wouldn't necessarily be harassing the guy. I'd probably be like, can you not do this? We'll just pretend like you did.
Yeah. That way, again, there seem like there's family issues. 4 wives, lots of kids. And this guy's a cheap ass buying stale things to feed everybody.
At least he was trying to feed him.
Not very well. I feel like he couldn't motivate his wives to get out there and work because he was doing a shitty job and bit off more than he could chew. And I really shouldn't find it funny that they hit him back.
It's funny.
He must have been a very small man in comparison to his wives, because even since they described the other woman as being bigger that fell on him, that how little was he? I just want to know for my own personal sake, because 1744, I just wouldn't have thought they'd gotten. I would have figured that they would have been able to arrest them because they hit their husband.
Yeah. I don't know. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Homicide Hobbies. If we made you laugh, if we made you cry, or if we mindfucked you for the day, then we thank you for listening. Please write a review on whatever you're listening to us on. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers. We're freaking awesome. And join us next week for another episode of Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy.
And I'm Claire.
That's all we've got.